Oh man, finally! Chrontendo episode 28 is here. One of the most delayed episodes of Chrontendo ever, but that's cool, it's all in the past now. This episode is really long, covering 3 big important games, as well as some utter crap. So I won't blather any further. We pick up at the very end of January 1988. As we approach the end of January 1988, we have the first Capcom game of the new year, Gun.Smoke, for the FDS. Note that's Gun.Smoke, to avoid confusion with a long-running Western TV show, I assume. Capcom reached a bit into their back catalog for this one. The arcade game came out in 1985. This is the arcade version here. If you think the game looks sort of like Commando, well then you're right. Gun.Smoke is sort of a follow-up to Commando, with a Wild West setting replacing jungle warfare. It landed in arcade about 6 months after Commando, and wasn't really as successful. Now in the US, the game was released on cartridge almost immediately, in February. Back then, Capcom was the exception to the rule about there being like a really big delay between the Japanese and the US releases of games. Now they have made a few changes here, like if you take a look at the Wanted poster, you'll see a bit more detail was put into each character's face. And they've added some more music. Really, the US version is better due to the cartridge having more space than the FDS discs. Like I was saying, Gun.Smoke is a Wild West version of Commando, but there are a few things added in. Shooting barrels will reveal money and power-ups. Yes, that's right, money. It's funny how stealing from the dead is considered a loathsome trait in real life, yet is perfectly acceptable from a heroic figure in video games. And Gun.Smoke has some cool stuff. Among the items you find in the barrel are a horse. I know, how did the horse get in a barrel? Well, just like the tanks in Akari Warriors, the horse gives you a bit of an offensive advantage. It can also take a few hits before disappearing. You can also buy special weapons, such as the shotgun. These weapons have finite ammo, but once you obtain a weapon, enemies will start dropping ammo refills. At the end of each level is a boss battle. I just took care of the first boss here. The special weapons are pretty helpful when it comes to fighting these guys, because they can be a bit tough. As I mentioned, you can buy weapons from the shopkeepers, who are just standing around hawking their wares, despite the fact that bullets are flying around everywhere. The Magnum is the most powerful gun. It's kind of an odd tradition, often found in video game shooters like Half-Life. The revolver is deadlier than a machine gun. One irritation in Gun.Smoke, you have to actually find the Wanted poster. You may have seen me grab it just a moment ago. And the Wanted poster is actually invisible until you shoot at it. Now, when you think about that, that's a pretty bizarre idea. I mean, isn't the point of having a Wanted poster so everyone can see it? Why would you have an invisible Wanted poster? You need to collect it before you can actually fight the boss. Without the poster, the level will just loop around infinitely. You really can't find it, you can actually just buy it from the shop. So while Gun.Smoke is not as well known as the home version of Commando, I'd say this port actually fares a little bit better in one regard. You can move and fire in different directions. The control scheme takes some getting used to. One button fires left, the other fires right, and pressing both at once will fire straight ahead. But the simple fact that you can shoot enemies without having to walk towards them makes the combat a bit smoother. All in all, I'd say it's a fine little game, though unfortunately Capcom was not too prolific in the first half of 1988, so it'll be a bit before their next game. Here's another one from Data East. After Karnoff, I had high hopes, but Donald Land, as we see here, is a licensed title, and has the distinction of being the first Famicom game based around characters from advertisements. Later, of course, we get games based on the Noid and Cool Spot, but Donald Land holds a special place in Nintendo history. So we see a bunch of characters here who don't really seem to figure into the game much at first, but in later levels, you'll often encounter them being held captive by a boss. The Hamburglar turns up as the second to last boss. The final boss is this guy, a creepy looking wizard clown with razor sharp teeth. So Mayor McCheese sends Ronald off to take care of this evil clown. Really, shouldn't the hamburger cop be taking care of this? This seems like a job for law enforcement personnel rather than a children's entertainer. Now Ronald does behave surprisingly violently in this game. Anyone who gets in his way he takes out with bombs. And not just regular bombs, but sticky bombs like they have in Halo. And we can't really blame him because McDonald Land is clearly a violent place, with maniacs walking around throwing TNT and exploding purple jack-o'-lanterns. This is a side of McDonald Land we never really saw in those TV commercials. Playing the game, you sort of have to wonder who it's aimed at. The whole McDonald theme makes it seem like a kiddie game, but it can be a bit tough at spots, and not always in a good way. Bombs will sometimes pass right through enemies, and when you throw them, they move in such a high arc it's kind of difficult to get them to land precisely. Oh yeah, there's also a little section in between levels where you can use your money, or your hamburgers technically, to buy stuff. And there are moves that require really precise timing I don't really have, like reaching high areas by throwing a bomb, then jumping, landing on the bomb, and then jumping again. I was trying to do that a moment ago, but wasn't being very successful. Donald Land is a surprisingly pleasant-looking game with crisp graphics and nice-looking colors, though Ronald's smock is red instead of yellow for some reason. There is a bit of a weird vibe here, like those trees that do that creepy smile when you jump on them, and then the kid in the little yellow jacket crying huge deadly tears. But this is a creative touch. How do you cross the lake? By jumping on the splashes of water caused by that ship firing cannonballs at you. And why is this game called Donald Land instead of McDonald Land? No idea. Wikipedia helpfully points out that Ronald McDonald is called Donald McDonald in Japan, but this doesn't explain the missing Mick. Donald Land is hardly a classic. Compared to Carnot, it's quite disappointing, but compared to, say, the Transformers games, it's pretty darn good. Worth checking out at least. Great, another golf game. The Famicom needs more golf games. Jumbo Ozaki's Hole-in-One Professional. So who or what is Jumbo Ozaki, might ask? Only Japan's most successful golf player ever. Real name Masashi Ozaki. He's called Jumbo because he's about 6 feet tall. Pretty tall for a Japanese guy. He's had a very successful career, so naturally he got his own golf game. First golf game we've seen for the Famicom to carry the name of an actual golfer on it. Remember that HAL has made several golf games for Nintendo, so why not put out their own golf game? The options are pretty typical. You can have 2-player competitive, tournament, and so on. You got the overhead view of the course. You can get a close-up of the putting green if you want. Use the D-pad to choose your club and move the angle of your shot. However, here's the difference. HAL decided to increase the difficulty by changing the way you control your swing. You still do the same, press the button, swing the club, then press it again at the right moment to strike the ball, but you need to time your button presses by looking at the golfer. There are no visual cues on that little semicircular swing indicator until after you've actually completed your swing. As a result, it can be very easy to slice or hook the ball by getting the timing off. Oh yeah, don't be fooled by that part right there. Putting is actually very difficult. That was pure luck. It's actually quite possible to miss the ball entirely, whereas the Nintendo golf games are pretty intuitive and obvious about the timing of the swing. Hole-in-One requires a bit of practice. When it comes to putting, however, there's really not enough time to try to accurately gauge the power of the swing, so you sort of have to tap the button twice real quick and hope you don't way overshoot. I guess the one cool thing is there's the overhead tracking shots of the course as you move from one hole to the next. The layout of the hole seems pretty typical for golf games. So Jumbo Ozaki Golf is pretty much a no-frills golf game with a twist on the swing mechanic. Oddly, Jumbo makes no appearances in the game as far as I can tell. It appears that they simply got the rights to stick his name on the box art and figured that would be good enough. Yes, from CBS and ISCO, the same guys who gave us Sakima 2, it's Paris Dakar Rally Special. Now every episode of Chrontendo needs one utterly ridiculous kusoge game, and this is it. We just saw a racing game based on the Paris Dakar Rally, Victory Run, in Chronturbo Episode 1. That was a nice looking gritty driving game. This game is nothing like Victory Run. So you unsuspectingly fire up the game, and you don't see any racing or cars. Well, haha, of course not, that would make too much sense. You don't even have a car yet. First step in a racing game is to find a car, right? So the game starts with this odd little mini adventure game. You go around talking to folks trying to find a sponsor and money to buy a car. This is mostly done by entering each building and talking to people about each of the topics in the menu. Eventually you'll get a sponsor, find some money, and then you can buy a car. Then you need to enroll in the rally. Then you get to do this sort of weird little reflex game. I guess this is to prove you're a good driver or something like that. I think ISCO just sort of invented the QuickTime event. So take that, Sega. So good for you. You celebrate by doing a little dance on top of an enormous brick wall, and then you jet off to Paris and the race begins. Now at this point you think, okay, that wasn't too bad. But next I'll be racing from Paris to Dakar. This will be sort of like a low-tech victory run, right? But you're very wrong. This game is not anything like you think it's going to be. The race starts and it seems really lame, not exciting at all, but it gets better. For some reason most of the cars go really slowly. This seems almost more like driving in traffic than racing. But also super fast cars come flying out from the bottom of the screen trying to smash into you. You have about 1/4 of a second to get out of the way if you see one appear. And probably the only way you're only ever going to die in this level is by those cars constantly doing suicide strikes on you. So finally you will eventually reach the end of stage 1. The staff will greet you with Nazi salutes, and then there's a bonus game. And here's your route, probably the least accurate map in a video game ever. Alright, here's stage 2, but this is a crazy little maze game. Well, the goal here is to avoid all the other cars, but you're sort of hampered by the fact that it's very easy to get the car stuck on a corner. This handles like the Atari 2600 Pac-Man. Now, honestly, I wanted to quit here, but I kept going. So what's next? Another racing segment, or something else? Now this is where it gets quite odd. You're now shooting giant yellow mice and dodging helicopters. I almost admire ISCO for saying, racing game? Paris-Dakar rally? How boring. Let's put some shooting sequences in here. Giant birds throwing eggs at you? And what's this? I mean, the game has now become completely unmoored from the original concept of driving a real-world race. It doesn't look too bad, but just like Sakima 2, the jumping controls are very awkward. Now actually I gave up at this level. But later you will get to like an underwater level, and even then like a top-down shooting level. I can just imagine someone buying this, thinking it'd be like something like Rad Racer, and then being completely baffled. So congratulations guys, you win the Chrontendo What the Hell Award this episode. We've actually got a few Famicom Disk System games today. The format hasn't quite died out yet. Released the same day as Jumbo Ozaki Hole-in-One is this little gem from HAL, Firebam. There are also ROMs out there titled Firebomb. The title screen gives credit to Live Planning, which was some sort of development company attached to HAL. The name was also on the weird Air Fortress game. Presumably games based on Water and Earth will be next. So Firebam is a side-scrolling hack and slash like we've seen many times before. Here we go. Action and adventure. Or maybe not. Alright, so we need to go into that portal there. Now we finally get to face some enemies. And there's also a shop to duck into as well, though whenever you go into a shop early in the game, they're always out of everything. And advance slowly or enemies will tend to land right on you. Holy cow, what is that thing? By the way, Firebam is full of long loading screens and requirements to flip the disc. About 50% of the unedited video was simply loading screens of some sort, and I pretty much edited all of those out for you. So after going into that portal there, you enter this weird, annoying, forced scrolling sequence. I'm not a big fan of this sort of thing, and there are a lot of these in the game. You probably spend more time on these screens than in the regular overworld. Whenever you kill monsters you get fire, which is like the game's money, but here the fires tend to like fly off the edge of the screen before you can grab them. After about a minute you're suddenly teleported to a boss level. First couple bosses seem absurdly easy, you just spam them with your arm swinging attack. Then you get a load of cash, or flames technically. When you return to the overworld, you're treated to this rather inexplicable split screen segment. Not really sure what it's trying to convey. Finally, a shop that's not sold out. Time to buy a better weapon. Alright, so what's to like about Firebam? Well, maybe the oddball creature design, the music is okay in parts, and the cover art is quite weird, sort of like an actual three-dimensional puppet thing was created. But what's not to like? I guess just about everything else. The hideous color design, for example, the unwieldy controls. In order to execute a high jump, you press down on the D-pad and the jump button. Why not press up and jump? That makes more sense. Trying to execute a running high jump over a boss or something while holding down is just sort of clumsy and unintuitive. Check out those giant giraffe creatures. Those things will actually kill you in one hit for some reason. Now, I don't really know the story behind live planning, but I didn't really care that much for Air Fortress, and I don't really like this game either. Air Fortress had all those rather boring shoot-'em-up sequences, and Fire Bam has this rather unpleasant 4 scrolling sections that seem to go on and on for way too long. And again, another extremely easy boss here, like 2 hits and he's gone. Both games have their moments, but they're certainly not at all consistent. Oh yeah, and suddenly the third boss is like way harder. You can swing at him all you want and he doesn't die. I'm gonna have to say that Fire Bam is one of HAL's lesser games, and not even as well made as something like Chesterfield. Quite a bit of a disappointment. Our first Bandai game this episode is Kamen Rider Club. And whoa ho, what an exciting intro. Explosions, motorcycles, giant bugs riding motorcycles. Alright, these are not technically bugs. These are just guys wearing bug helmets. Kamen Rider was a Japanese TV series, or rather a whole bunch of TV series beginning in 1971 and continuing on today as far as I know. These are what you would call tokusatsu shows, that is, special effects shows. They mostly revolve around superheroes and guys in monster suits. So anyway, Kamen Rider Club, developed by Toza, naturally, is a weird little game. Half side-scrolling platformer and half RPG. It's not a combination that really works in this case. Maybe in a better game it might be okay. As you may have noticed, the mechanics in this game are a little odd. You can only punch straight down, and doing so while jumping causes you to sort of hover in midair as long as you keep punching, so you will need to jump every time you want to attack an enemy. For a game that relies so much on jumping, the jumping controls are a little strange. Once you jump, you can't control your character in any fashion, and in order to jump any way other than straight up, you'll need to start running prior to hitting the jump button. The jumps are often set so that you will land on the side of a platform, and then you'll have to frantically hit the button in order to climb up to the top. One little goofy quirk in this game is that hitting your head on a platform will temporarily flatten your head, preventing you from climbing up any platforms. So anyway, if you touch an enemy without punching him or above, you'll need to battle him in these RPG-type sequences. You do so by running into each enemy and forcing them back to the wall. This is done by hitting the button over and over again frantically. I guess these guys aren't so bad if they go to heaven when they die. So, what do you get in this game? Well, it's lots of frustrating jumps, getting stuck quite a lot, accidentally running into enemies, having to do these stupid battles over and over again. And again, I really need to stress, the jumping in this game is not cool. This kind of thing tends to happen over and over again. Every once in a while I find something cool like a motorcycle, but look what happens when you try to use it. Oop, it's gone. While this game doesn't look that bad on paper, actually trying to play it, well, you'll find yourself getting probably pretty pissed off, so I'd say this is definitely one to avoid. There are a few obscure games this episode, but only one that can properly be described as a cult classic. Gardic Gaiden, or Guardian Legend in the US, is another product from the good folks at Compile, published by Irem. The US version was picked up by Broderbund. A rather cool music theme sets the mood for a tale of cosmic destruction. What's the plot here? Well, a mysterious planet is headed towards Earth, and in such cases it's best to shoot first and ask questions later. So you say, is Guardian Legend a shooter? Well, how appropriate, since Compile is known for its excellent shoot-'em-ups. But there's more to the game than that. Guardian Legend is very unusual in that it's a hybrid which grafts vertical shooting action onto a Zelda clone. This is definitely not the first hybrid shooter we've seen. Remember Galg, the scroll RPG? Well, as the name indicates, this is a sequel to Gardic, a 1987 MSX game. Karaoke is sort of an unusual game. It's a non-scrolling shooter. You fight one screen full of enemies at a time, and then on each screen you allocate a certain number of points to speed, weapons, and special abilities. But the points are extremely limited, and the game is actually extremely difficult. Now, Guardian Gaiden, by comparison, is quite sophisticated. The game opens up with a standard vertical shoot-em-up level, followed by a huge classic compiled boss with lots of gun ports. Now, once you actually reach the alien world, which is called Naju, you come across a message from one of the previous inhabitants who attempted to initiate a self-destruct sequence to blow up Naju. The fact that someone is reading the message indicates that he failed in his task. The instructions are given to you for destroying Naju and its dangerous alien inhabitants. Now at this point, the game switches to a top-down Zelda-esque action-adventure game. Your goal is to find a series of corridors and activate the self-destruct switches in each. But of course, along the way you'll need to hunt down weapons, power-ups, and the like. Each screen fills up with enemies as you enter, and you can blast them with your standard ray gun. You have a decent-sized life bar, and you'll need it. Luckily, items to refill your life bar are pretty common. Now, certain screens will trap you as soon as you enter, and a mini-boss fight will ensue. Here's the first one coming up here. This first guy's a real piece of cake. Later mini-bosses tend to move around a lot more and shoot at you. Defeating one of these guys will generally net you a useful power-up. Once you've defeated him, then the doors will open up. Now here's the map screen. As you can see, I've obtained a few special weapons. Those are the icons at the bottom of the screen. These weapons all have limited use and will consume power chips. Now finally, I've reached the first corridor here. There's usually some sort of trick to open these things. For the first one, you simply need to shoot it a whole bunch of times. Later on, you need to perform less obvious actions to open the doors. Fortunately, there is usually a room nearby with a hint. Now the character you play, the Guardian, I guess is sort of like every otaku's dream. It's a sexy robot girl that can turn into a spaceship. That sequence is actually quite cool. Each corridor consists of a decent-sized shoot-em-up level with a boss at the end. The first few have an underwater theme. At this point, I should probably point out that Guardian Legends is a tough game. These shooting sequences don't really obey modern protocols. Enemies tend to come at you from the side or behind, or rather, if you pass them without destroying them, they will frequently turn around and come up behind you. You've got lots of projectiles flying in all directions. Unlike most shooting games, enemies don't just shoot randomly, they all shoot towards you. Virtually everything in this game homes in on you. The life bar and frequent health refills makes these sections possible, but it's absolutely impossible to dodge everything this game throws at you. This difficulty can extend to the overworld as well, especially upon exiting a room. You may find yourself stuck behind some blocks while 5 or 6 enemies suddenly converge upon you, instantly killing you. After completing a corridor, you'll usually get a key that will open up a new area on the map. Also, you can pick up life bar extensions, shield power-ups, weapons power-ups, and more special weapons. Special weapons are often the key to surviving the boss battles in this game, as the standard laser is pretty pathetic. These are some more of the early bosses right here, such as a giant lobster. Again, the claws are very difficult to dodge. This particular power-up right here is very helpful. Sort of has like a little sphere that revolves around you, destroying enemies. It's a bit more powerful than the standard laser, and provides a bit of protection from various projectiles as well. And seriously, look at this. And everything just heads right towards you. It's impossible to dodge anything in this game. While a lot of shooters nowadays throw way more bullets on the screen, the bullets in Guardian Legend all move fast. The result in some ways is sometimes more frantic than a lot of modern bullet hell type shooters. Another thing we pick up a lot are these chips. Those are the little blue and red dots that you sometimes see hidden in blocks. There's 2 of them right here. Guardian Legend is a game that would be said to have RPG elements nowadays. The chips are a novel way of giving the game an RPG feel without getting too complicated. They sort of compress both experience and money into one item. The more chips you have, the bigger your main weapon becomes. And the chips are also used to fire your special weapons, so they serve to increase your offensive strength. However, they're also used by upgrades at the shop, so they function as currency as well. Oh yeah, and here's an enemy that's very difficult to destroy and just keeps following you around. Everywhere you go, he heads right towards you. And also, picking up the chips will replenish a bit of your health, so they're just all around useful. Guardian Legend is a long game. There are 21 corridors, and the world map is 24 screens by 24 screens, though quite a few of the screens are actually, blank. It's still at least 400 screens, I'd say, so it's quite comparable to Legend of Zelda. As you progress, the enemies get tougher and tougher, but hopefully you have found quite a few upgrades by now. Corridor 21 is really just a boss rush level, with a few waves of weak enemies mixed in. As you can imagine, with 20 shooter sections, some of the bosses are repeated in various color-swapped versions. I've opened up pretty much the entire map here and I'm heading towards the final area. Here's one of the creepiest looking bosses, who constantly sends these streams of horns to follow you around. Again, you just can't avoid these things. Luckily, you can pick up quite a few super bombs, called enemy erasers in the game. Now, by the time you reach the last level, the bosses, which give you so much trouble at first, should be much easier to defeat due to your increased power. After completing the final level, Naju will self-destruct, and you escape just seconds prior to the big explosion. You would almost think Konami made this game. More seafood-themed bosses here. You can really see the usefulness of that revolving sphere thing. Here's a palette swap of a boss we saw just a few moments ago. We can make short work of him with the special weapons. And this guy throws tons of, like, flying eyeballs at you. If nothing else, the bosses are quite creative. So we escape, Naju blows up, but, you know, naturally it's not over, because a moment later, one final boss will appear. In many ways, Guardian Legend is the culmination of everything Compile had been doing for the last few years. They've been making tons of shooters, actually since 1983, sort of combines those and Gabelius, which is their attempt at a Zelda-style game from 1987. There's a lot to like about Guardian Legend. It's a slick, well-designed game, technically accomplished. The video might make you think there's a lot of flicker, but when you play the game, it looks very good. As always, Compile manages to stick down tons of moving objects on the screen without slowdown. And the number of power-ups in this game is amazing. There are 12 distinct special weapons, which are almost too many. Some you may never use. But as unique and accomplished as this game is, it's far from perfect. For one thing, this game is long. There's a kind of a lack of variety. Whereas the best Zelda clones give you a wide variety of environments to explore, Guardian Legend is a series of interconnected rooms. It's really not that different than the huge dungeons with deadly towers. And almost every room has enemies to fight. Of course, lots of enemies is not necessarily a problem. You encounter lots of enemies in RPGs, but you also get experience from fighting in them. In Zelda, you could collect jewels, but here, what do you really get from fighting enemies? Not much. They sometimes drop credits, but really there's not much need to actually fight them. I found myself running out of rooms before the enemies spawned most of the time. Yet I'd be foolish to call Guardian Legend a bad game. Over the years, it's found quite a following. Check out the user reviews on GameFAQs, for example. People love this game. It does have a certain hip cachet, especially for being a well-made title from a respected developer that didn't really sell a lot of copies. So it can claim to be sort of a lost classic. And the fact that it's a crazy combination of a shoot-'em-up and a Zelda clone just sort of adds to the appeal. Certainly one of those fascinating and unusual titles we've seen so far. All the interesting games this episode are all sort of scrunched together, I'm afraid. Next up is none other than Konami's Contra. If that title screen looked a little different, well, there's a good reason for that. We're actually playing the original Japanese version, in a fan translation from Stardust Crusaders. Much like Karnov, quite a bit of stuff was dropped for the US release, such as the introduction and the cool little transitions between the levels. So playing this version of Contra is like watching a director's cut of a movie you've only seen in an edited version. It's sort of an all-new experience. We learn here that Contra takes place in the 27th century near New Zealand. The US manual indicates the game takes place in 1987 in the Amazon basin. Either way, aliens have established a secret military base on planet Earth, and you need to take on the aliens and their boss, Red Falcon. It's sort of a weird name for an alien overlord. Why would he name himself after an Earth bird? The Japanese version even has like a Ghost and Goblin style progress screen. Though thinking back at the time, Contra seemed pretty similar to Ghosts and Goblins. Sort of similar art styles and gameplay. While nowadays we consider Contra to be a pioneering title in the run and gun genre, back in 87 and 88 it was just one of a handful of games which you have to run from left to right and kill everything that crosses your path. As mentioned, the arcade version of Contra made its appearance in 1987 and was a substantial hit. Military-themed games were becoming quite popular at the time. Check out the 1987 arcade roundup in Chrontendo 24 for other examples. And of course, the Iran-Contra scandal has been in the news for a while. The idea of naming a game Contra seemed pretty bold, but it did fit in with the whole kind of Rambo thing that was going on back then. along with movies like Predator and Commando. Military dudes with big guns was a major entertainment subgenre at that time. Now here's a more familiar US version. While the game plays the same, all the story and cutscenes have been dropped and the graphics have been altered. This went on to be a huge hit and one of the most popular games for the system. And in Europe, the game was released as Probotector. What? Well, you see, apparently people killing other people in video games was considered bad, so everyone was changed to robots. Yep, sorry about that, Europe. Here's the Japanese version again. Note the foliage kind of swaying around in the background. There's a lot of nice little details like that in this version. In Japan, publishers had control over the manufacture of their own cartridges, and Konami used special memory chips for Contra. In the US, Nintendo themselves manufactured all the carts and then sold them to the publishers, so the US Contra had to be redesigned for Nintendo's chips. Oh, and here's one of the between-level cutscenes. Lance, or is it Bill, radios in his progress, and the map screen will show you as you make your progress towards Red Falcon. So anyway, about Contra, I assume most of you are familiar with this game. It alternates between side-scrolling sequences and pseudo-3D sequences, where the camera is behind your back and you run down corridors. The object here is to shoot out the locks of each door, moving down the hallways until you reach the boss. The hallway sequences are a bit annoying and don't quite fit in with the rest of the game, not to mention that the enemy soldiers look really goofy the way they jump around. Later Contra games would drop these altogether or replace them with top-down sequences. A major factor in Contra's appeal is the two-person gameplay. In both the arcade and the home versions, two people can play simultaneously. This was becoming standard practice in shoot-'em-ups, but was still kind of unusual in platformers. And the great thing about the two-player co-op is not only is there no downtime or waiting turns, but both gamers are always playing, but it also made the game a bit easier. Once again, however, Europe got the bone, as the arcade version used alternating turns for the two-player version. Another thing that Contra borrowed from shoot-'em-ups, as well as early running guns like Gun.Smoke, was the power-ups. Contra has lasers, flamethrowers, and so on, but there is more of one weapon that stood out above all the others. And what I'm speaking of, this one here, the mighty spread shotgun. With this in your hand, you can just wreak death and destruction, taking out multiple enemies at once, hitting bosses, weak spots easily. Once you get that gun, make sure you don't lose it. On that last boss, you may have noticed a certain influence from the movie Alien. We'll see it again later as well. Regardless, that was sort of like another gigantic Konami boss. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one other noteworthy fact about Contra. It's actually very hard. The entire series is notoriously difficult. There is some debate as to which is the most difficult game, maybe Contra Hardcore, but this one is still pretty tough. Fortunately, the famous Konami code can be entered in on the title screen. This will give you 30 lives, which seems like a lot, but in this game, 30 lives can be squandered. One hit will kill you after all. Now look at this! Moving trees and snow. It's actually snowing in the Japanese version. Once again, thank Konami's proprietary VRC2 chip. Things do get a bit hectic in this level, not only a soldier shooting at you, but someone in the force is like tossing grenades. Though once again, the spread shot is your best friend. This level's boss in particular is a bit of a pain with a regular gun, but can be taken out in about 3 seconds with the spread shot. Well, finally you make your way to Red Falcon's boss for the final few levels. It's helpfully decorated with flamethrowers mounted on the walls. I suppose it's better than having Mega Man-style spikes sticking out everywhere. And again, some of these sequences can get a little bit tough. Oh, here we get treated to another cool cutscene. After this, you make your way into the weird alien inner sanctum of Red Falcon, which actually looks kind of like the final level of YY World. As mentioned earlier, Contra virtually defined the running gun. Sure, earlier games like Commando and Akari Warriors established the basic concept, but Contra was like the run and gun Gradius. It provided sort of the model for subsequent games in the genre. And the run and gun was a pretty major genre in the late 80s and early 90s. We'll see other run and guns for the Famicom. Here's another boss inspired by the Alien movie. As always, Konami's very high standards placed Contra far above similar games, like Bandai's Lupin III, for example. Everything from the graphics, the sound, the controls is really top-notch. So we finally come to Red Falcon, and he's a giant pulsating heart. Once again, the Japanese version has a few details not found in the US version, like sort of the ground and aliens all sort of pulsating. Ah, that'll take care of them. Coming up here is another little scene not in the US release, as they escape on a helicopter. Oh yeah, and you think as they get away the base is gonna blow up? Well, of course it's a Konami game, right? At least in these games, the bases always have the courtesy to wait for the heroes to actually escape and get far enough away before self-destructing. If I were a video game villain, I'd set my base to blow up the second I died. At least that way I'd get some post-mortem revenge. Oh, and by the way, the Japanese version has a little secret hidden message at the end, which we'll see in just a moment. So, there we go, another classic game from Konami. How do they keep doing it? We have a couple more Konami games this episode, neither of which is very interesting. But they do have a few more good games coming out in a few months, so don't expect the flood of awesome Konami games to stop anytime soon. Here it is, folks, the hugest old-school Japanese RPG ever, or at least the biggest in Japan, Dragon Quest III, which begins very modestly, no title screen or theme music. You enter your name and the game starts rather suddenly. The famous Dragon Quest theme music does play at the end of the game. Possibly the actual Dragon Quest III logo doesn't appear until the end in the Japanese version as well. When Enix released it as Dragon Warrior 3 in 1991, they added a new title screen, which matches the style of that in Dragon Warrior 2. They also created some new cutscenes, which depict the protagonist's father, Ortega, fighting a dragon, and then falling into a crater. It's interesting that the guy's name is Ortega. I guess this is the first Hispanic video game character? This scene is actually pretty cool, and I like the way that the dragon's wing keeps flapping, even after you cut it off. Perhaps this was added in to avoid complaints about the lack of dragons in this game. So the game officially starts with you being waken up by your mother. Yep, today is a big day to follow in your father's footsteps and go on some kind of heroic quest. Naturally, you have to head to the castle and have an audience with the king, who tells you to kill some evil being who's threatening the world and then gives you 500 gold. As is always the case with these Japanese RPGs, they're always a bit cheap. You think if you're going to save the world, they'd give you more money than that. Naturally, the castle contains various locked rooms and those out-of-reach treasure chests. By now, it's already an RPG cliché. Guess we'll have to find the key and come back later. But first, gather your party. Dragon Quest III abandons the structure of Dragon Quest II, where you need to run around looking for the rest of your party, instead allowing you to create them from scratch at the tavern. You pick a name, then choose a character class. Other than the RPG standard classes, there's a merchant and a goof-off, which have specific uses, but are not generally useful. One nice touch, you and your party start with basic weapons and armor, something which can be exploited to earn extra cash at the very beginning if you like. Unlike Final Fantasy, you can create new characters and swap them out at any time, though characters not actually fighting battles won't earn an experience. It's been stated before that a major part of the Dragon Quest appeal in Japan is the nostalgia factor. It has a certain comfort food appeal. Certainly that's on display here. Music, sprites, background tiles are often taken directly from earlier games, though Toriyama has designed a whole bunch of new monsters. Dragon Quest III is sort of like Dragon Quest II, but bigger. The game mechanics are virtually identical, but there's a bigger map, more spells, armor, so on. A few things have been added, but a Dragon Quest fan could pretty much pick this up without ever having to open the instruction manual and have no problem. Dragon Quest is not always reinventing itself, like Final Fantasy. The game is structured basically as a series of fetch quests. That is, you get some clues from an NPC, go to the nearest dungeon, get to the bottom, and then find the key or magical flute or mystic amulet to make progress into the next area. I've just used, for example, a certain magical globe which will open up that previously locked area. And here are the typical Dragon Quest dungeons, with certain areas invisible until you actually enter them. You start off on a relatively small island, but soon find a passage to a larger continent. Heading out, you'll encounter various quests, like here for example, an entire village is asleep. Nearby, you'll find a hidden elf village, where you learn that the Elf Queen is responsible. Naturally, you have to go about setting things right by heading to the bottom level of a cave and retrieving some sort of object. Now, as the Dragon Quest games progressed, an emphasis was placed more on storytelling rather than innovative gameplay, and the games contain little vignettes and interesting characters. That particular tradition more or less begins here. The playable characters are complete ciphers and never say a word, but you'll encounter many NPCs with their own little stories and problems for you to fix. An emphasis on tragic or unlucky lovers seems to pop up a lot. Final Fantasy had a bit of this, but Dragon Quest III really makes it sort of the focus of the game. Taking the Dream Ruby back to the Elf Queen will cause her to give you the wake-up powder. Little sad story here. And there is one rather generous touch. The game gives you your teleportation spells to get in and out of dungeons pretty early in the game. So while the dungeons can be tough at times, they aren't quite the hellish nightmares as like those in Final Fantasy, or to like fight your way out of the dungeons after getting the quest item. One new thing here, there's actually betting on monster fights inside the monster arena. You can actually gamble money on this. Probably one of the most creative and amusing moments in Dragon Quest III is here, where after completing a quest for the king, he is so pleased he offers you his throne. After becoming king, you can walk around in his royal get-up and talk to everyone. The princess, in particular, seems quite pleased, maybe even a little bit too much. You can't leave the castle, but you can explore the town and talk to everyone, who are quite eager to flatter you. But eventually the game must go on, so you have to track down the old king. Turns out he's actually hanging out in the monster arena, enjoying civilian life. You'll need to talk to him to convince him to take back the crown. So all in all, I'd say sort of like the NPCs and the various sort of other characters are a bit more detailed and realistic than they were in Dragon Quest II. As I mentioned, a number of new spells and enemies have been added. As expected, there's all kinds of nasty status ailments they can inflict on you. Stealing magic, poisoning, and sleep are among the common, with one new one, Confusion, which causes you to attack your own party. But as you can see here, you have quite a few helpful spells as well. Attack spells, support spells, things that increase your offense, increase your defense, that sort of thing. Ah, here we go. Enemies that will put your entire party to sleep. Definitely among the most painful points in the game. Dungeons are a bit more creative this time around as well. There are still the usual towers and caverns, but they mix up a bit. This one right here, for example, is an actual pyramid. I found the second key. There are actually 3 levels of keys in this game. Another new feature is the day and night cycle. Sort of like Castlevania 2, the enemies get tougher at night and the village is all shut down. But night has its advantages as well. A couple points you can sneak into an otherwise inaccessible area at night. For example, here in the town of Isis, well, at night, everyone's asleep. But there is one door in particular that's always guarded during the day. I'm going to sneak into the castle and open that door now. I can finally get to those treasure chests. Sadly, once you manage to get the necessary keys to reach those locked treasure chests, the results are always disappointing. Whereas Final Fantasy would reward you like these powerful weapons and whatnot, Dragon Quest usually just gives you small amounts of gold and common items. It's a bit of a shame. You can also sneak into the Queen's chambers at night. Turns out she's quite pleased to see you and will give you a helpful item. The Wizard's Ring, which will refill a small amount of your magic, but can only be used a finite number of times. Being low on magic is a common occurrence in this game. Later on in the game, you'll need to sneak into an evil king's castle at night, use a special item, the Mirror of Ra, on him, and it's revealed he's actually a demon in disguise as a human. Apparently, the game designers like this little plot twist since they use it twice in the game. There's another village where the king turns out to be a monster taking human form. We do see one little issue here. Often the overworld sprites look nothing at all like the battle screen depictions. That guy was a little winged demon a moment ago, but now he's a troll. So anyway, after various adventures, you'll finally get your hands on a ship. Now you can explore the rest of the world, which, interestingly enough, turns out to be roughly the same layout as the real world, with cities and locations similar in location and name to their real-world counterparts. For example, the pyramid is located in what would be Egypt. Another very cool thing is a town that you helped create. Upon finding a settlement, you'll learn a merchant is needed to get the town started. Now this is really about the only useful thing you can do with a merchant. You add one to your party and bring him back here, he'll leave your party permanently, but the town will grow as the game progresses, and even has its own little subplot. It's a very nice and creative touch. There's even a little Sokoban minigame involving pushing boulders around. Here you can see I've replaced my Pilgrim with a goof-off. Note that female goof-offs are dressed in Playboy-style bunny suits. Now goof-offs are useless in battle. They can't use very much equipment, and they have really awful stats. And often in battle, they won't even obey your commands. When they do manage to hit, they'll usually do like maybe 1 damage. So it's best to get your party leveled up, and then add a goof-off once you're strong enough to get by with only 3 functional members. Then you need to level them up to level 20. Why? Well, once the character has reached level 20, you can change classes at this one particular shrine. The overall best class is the Sage, who can learn all the Pilgrim and Wizard spells, and can even equip decent armor and weapons. It's kind of like sort of like the best of all worlds, kind of rolled into one class. The goof-off is the only class that can switch to a Sage without having a rare item called the Book of Satori. So at level 20 you can switch your class, but they will start back at level 1 and keep most of their stats. So your hit points will not actually drop all the way back down, even though you're now at level 1 again. And you'll still have all your spells. Now since very few experience points are required to level up at first, you can level up your new class pretty quickly. Granted, this is not nearly as cool as a class system like in Final Fantasy III, but it is nice that Dragon Quest III gives you some customization options. Sally's now a Sage, and she levels up like 3 levels on the very first enemy we defeat. Now here's another interesting moment. Your hero has to face one particular dungeon all by himself. Later there's a dungeon where you can use no magic. The final key is the 3rd key that you get. It can lock any door in the game. Tongue Bear. That's an odd name for sure. At another point you need to use a thigh bone to find a mysterious ghost ship sailing around the ocean. Why? Well, once again it's to find some sort of mystic thingamajig required to open up a portal to somewhere or another. Now by the time this came out, Dragon Quest was enormously popular in Japan, but Japan got even more Dragon Quest crazy, buying tons of copies of this game, almost 4 million copies. In fact, Dragon Quest III is the 3rd biggest selling Famicom game in Japan, after Super Mario Bros. And Mario 3. It was the best-selling Japanese RPG for 12 years until Dragon Quest VII came out in 2000. Sold more copies than Super Mario World and more than Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time combined. Though as you may recall, in the Famitsu Readers poll, this game came in at number 3, meaning it was the highest placed Dragon Quest game and the highest placed 2D game. Naturally, it's been remade. You might recall this Game Boy Color remake from 2000. Aside from more detailed graphics, this also offered a bit of backstory and a lengthy introduction showing Ortega's adventures. But the best version of this game is definitely the Super Famicom remake, released in 1996. Aside from the beautiful graphics and sound, the gameplay has been sped up, the menu is less aggravating, and there's even additional content added. It's recently given an unofficial English translation, so if you're going to play Dragon Quest III on an emulator, this right here is definitely the one to get. Anyway, back to the game. Dragon Quest III does spice up a bit, adding in some fancy effects, like here you need to throw a sword into a volcano, causing an eruption, which allows you to cross a previously unsuccessful area. You get all this screen shaking, flashing, and whatnot. All the lava will come out and dry, allowing you to cross over that little river there. And the teleportation portals also use this crazy effect here. Though having a spell that allows you to travel to pretty much any previously visited city means these portals are not nearly as important as they were in Dragon Quest II. I will bring up a spoiler alert here. Unlike the first 2 Dragon Quest games, there are actually some surprises in store, and Dragon Quest III, along with Final Fantasy and Metal Gear, is one of the few games we've seen that actually contains, like, plot twists. Much of the second part of the game is traveling around the world getting 6 magical orbs. Well, that sounds sort of familiar, doesn't it? Kind of like Final Fantasy. This eventually allows you to access the boss's castle and fight him, but this guy is actually sort of too goofy looking to be a real boss. Nope, it turns out he is merely the underling of an infinitely more evil guy called Zoma. Right when you think the game's over, suddenly Zoma strikes. Though now that I think about it, didn't Dragon Quest II have a sort of similar plot twist where it turns out the wizard you were fighting was actually not the real bad guy? There was like another, even more bad guy in charge of him? Well, anyway, investigating a huge fissure that appears in the ground, your next step is actually going to be to jump into the fissure, and then you will actually land in the world below. At this point, the whole day and night cycle stops, as it's always night in this world. And it turns out this world below is Alefgard, the world from Dragon Quest 1 and 2. Unlike Dragon Quest 2, here Alefgard is a nearly perfect duplicate of that from the first game, right down to the guy who refills your magic for free in the first castle. Though Dragon Quest 3 is clearly set in the past, for example, one town, Hockness, is a town here, though in Dragon Quest 1 it's only an abandoned ruin. Now, one thing about Dragon Quest 3 is it is huge and long. I think Dragon Quest 2 had around maybe 11 towns and friendly castles, whereas Dragon Quest 3 has about 23, plus lots of shrines, caves, towers, and so on. And quite frankly, I do feel the game sort of drags a bit in the middle. Once you obtain the ship and you're free to sort of explore the world at will, the game doesn't really tell you quite what to do next. It seems you can travel around a lot, but there's a lot of dead ends. At this point, the game's focus actually becomes running around the world trying to collect those 6 spheres. And while the game's strength is all the little stories that happen, after a certain point, the overall narrative arc becomes a bit fuzzy. Much like Phantasy Star, after a while I was thinking, oh god, another dungeon? Another magic item to collect? It just never stops. And this is long. You will fight a lot of battles in this game. At the very end, the toughest enemies will yield about 2,000 experience points. In order to learn the final spell for Sage's Sacrifice, your Sage will need to be at about 1 million experience points. Oh yeah, one little weird coincidental similarity to Final Fantasy, you need to find this rare metal in order to have the best sword in the game made. Despite all the details the two games share, couldn't be more than coincidence because, Final Fantasy came out right before this. Like I was saying, you'll need about 1 million experience points. In contrast, Dragon Quest 2, you were good at about maybe 50 to 75,000. So you've got to keep leveling your characters up, and late in the game, common enemies will usually do obscene amounts of damage, and some enemies can attack up to 3 times per turn. In the final dungeon, you encounter Ortega himself, still alive, and you'll witness an overlong cutscene battle where Ortega dies. In the time-honored Japanese RPG tradition, your party sort of stands around and watches while Ortega gets killed, since RPG characters become helpless imbeciles during cutscenes. Since your hero is silent, the whole thing occurs with absolutely no reaction on your part. Eventually you'll encounter Zoma, and the final battle will occur, but only after 3 sub-bosses in a row. And in many ways, Dragon Quest III is a huge improvement over the second game. There's much more freedom in forming your party, and a lot of the small annoyances have been fixed. But much of Dragon Quest III just sort of feels like Dragon Quest II, only with more stuff. More spells, more weapons, more towns. I should point out, despite this video being very long, we're only seeing a tiny fraction of the stuff in the game. But it's still the same design, same music, same battles. The only major change was allowing you to create your own characters. But after Final Fantasy's combat system and elemental affinities, it's kinda hard to go back to Dragon Quest style battles. And there are still things I hate, like using a powerful spell that sucks up tons of magic points, and then having it miss 3 out of 4 enemies, and constantly struggling with a limited inventory, and the crazy menu systems where in order to open the door with a key, you have to open up a menu, choose the character that has the key, select the key, and then select use. But still, taken on its own terms, the game succeeds, and remains, I guess, sort of the pinnacle of the old-style Japanese RPGs. After this, Enix and Chunsoft would switch tactics a bit. The next game wouldn't come out for 2 years. The first 3 games were released within about a 22-month period. The next 3 would actually take 7 years, and then 14 years for the 3 after that. And in some ways, the entire series peaked with this game. I don't know if you caught the big surprise ending there, but once you go back to the king of Alefgard, he then gives you the new name of Erdrick. And so it turns out that you are the Erdrick who is mentioned so much in Dragon Quest 1 and 2. It's a pretty clever ending. So is this the best Famicom game ever? Well, we'd probably say no, it's not. Is it playable? Well, it's a little long and frustrating. I'd say actually check out the Super Famicom version if you want to try one version of Dragon Quest 3. But by creating a game this successful, Enix was obviously doing something right. And now for something a bit less ambitious. All fair to middling things must come to an end, I suppose, and the end has finally come to Konami's Famicom Disk System series of sports games. This is Exciting Soccer Konami Cup, the final game in Konami's exciting series. I know, get a hold of yourself, it's okay, we'll go on somehow. Probably the most interesting thing about Exciting Soccer is all these stats for the various teams. Okay, kick, running, defense, luck. One thing I've discovered through Chrontendo is the pervasive influence of RPGs in Japanese games around this time period. Even soccer games are now employing numerical statistics. So anyway, go ahead, pick your team, which you can rename if you wish, and then choose a play option. So far, not too exciting. Now, probably the craziest thing about exciting soccer is the bird's eye view of the players. I guess it's intended to look more realistic, like Hudson's Power League for the PC Engine, but the problem with this is that the results always look kind of ugly. Exciting soccer plays like your typical soccer game. You kick the ball around, the game will automatically switch you from one player to another as the ball gets passed around. It's very easy for your goalie to block a ball, so scoring is difficult. I can see games tending to end in 0-0. Unfortunately, even the halftime show is really lame. It features Pintaro the Penguin, but geez. Everything about this game screams of lack of excitement, despite the game's name. While this game is hardly terrible, it's certainly no double dribble, that's for sure. Well, it's now time to wish our fond farewells to the Konami Exciting Sports series.
Why do birds suddenly appear every time you are near? Just like me, they long to be.
February 18th hosts not one, but two oddball games. Now does this one look familiar? Karaoke Studio Senyou Cassette Volume 2 from Bandai. That's even the exact same title screen from Volume 1. It even has the 1987 copyright date on it. Load the thing up, and it even has the same songs. To refresh your memory, this is a series that goes along with a microphone attachment Bandai made. Sort of the karaoke version of the Family Trainer series. But I really don't understand the purpose of this. I mean, it seems like it's almost the exact same cartridge as the last one in the series. There are a few new songs, but most of the songs and graphics are repeated. Okay, so the reason for this thing's existence is a bit of a mystery, but I guess we don't have to worry about it at this point, since there never was a Volume 3. In a very weird disconnect between image, sound, and content, we have this title screen which combines Scott Joplin's jaunty little tune, The Entertainer, with the ultra-Japanese image of cherry blossoms falling into a pond in a game about playing the stock market. Huh. Matsumoto Tooru no Kabushiki Hisshou Gaku. An oddity from Imagineer, a publisher that seems to specialize in oddball games, or at least games that seem a little inscrutable to Western gamers. So this one here is a stock market game. Kabushiki means stocks. Yep, the idea is to play the stock market and make a lot of money. I'm going to assume that Matsumoto Tooru is a real person, presumably a well-known figure in investing or a guy who writes guides to financial markets or something like that. The main screen is where you buy and sell stocks. That's actually sort of what I'm doing here. I'm going to buy some stocks from this guy. If nothing else, the game gives you some amusing illustrations of various actions. It's a good thing I don't play the stock market myself. If my performance in this game is any indication, I would not do so well. Other than the actual trading, you do some other financial-related activity as well. For example, you can check out the fax machine, or teletype, or whatever it is for news and tips. You can look at performance graphs, that sort of thing. I've heard that in Japan, the Famicom was considered to be sort of strictly a toy for children, even more so than in the United States. While PCs were the preferred platform for adult gamers. But clearly there are exceptions, such as this game, which was definitely aimed at an older audience. There's some 80s technology right there. This must have done well enough to warrant a sequel, which is a more ambitious-looking game that came out about a year later. Imagineer would eventually go on to release games that are a bit more familiar to Western gamers, like Super Turrican and even the Super Nintendo version of Wolfenstein 3D. As you can sort of see from the results here, I'm not exactly a financial whiz. So an interesting looking little game, but probably one that most folks will want to shy away from. Ah, Konami, your winning streak is about to end. This is Tetsuwan Atom, based on a world-famous character by Osamu Tezuka. In English we of course call him Astro Boy. Astro Boy is the heavily armed little robot boy. He made his debut in the manga form in 1952, and naturally animated series, movies, and so on followed. Astro Boy is perhaps the longest lasting and most well-known character from Japanese animation, so it's a shame this game isn't better. It seems that a pack of thieves have stolen a treasure chest from Professor Ochanomizu, and Astro Boy is attempting to chase after them. At least that's what it appears is happening here. Astro Boy can't be hurt by touching the enemies, however, while you can jump on them and run into them, even hit them and knock them down, they are all carrying bazookas, which will blow you up with one hit. Much like the Takechi Kitano game, repeatedly hitting an enemy that you've knocked to the ground will eventually kill them, because of course you're a murderous android, and beating humans to death with your fist will give you 500 points. Now so far, not too bad, but here's the game's first huge flaw. It comes in flying. Jumping 3 times in a row will activate your jetpack. That's what I'm trying to do here. Or at least it's supposed to. It's absurdly hard to get the timing just right, and usually involves jumping around for about a minute before suddenly, for no apparent reason, your jetpack kicks in. This is way more difficult than it needs to be. Ah, finally. If by some minor miracle you actually get airborne and make it across the ocean, the game switches to a generic Famicom platformer mode, with awkward controls as a bonus. Like right here, for example, I got stuck going into this room and you need to actually punch out those hieroglyphic things in your way which are blocking the staircase, which is weird because they look like they're painted on the wall, but somehow they are blocking you from leaving? This doesn't make any sense. Later enemies won't always kill you with one hit, but they do drain your life bar a little bit. And you can call on Professor Ochanomizu to refill your energy if necessary. All this weirdness is pretty typical for the game. There's not much sense of internal logic, and none of this really feels like it has anything to do with Astro Boy. Another irritating moment here, trying to jump over that hand and not get killed by those balls of fire constantly flying through the air there. Whoop, I got hit by one that I couldn't even see. After about 1,000,000 tries I finally got through. Oh, not there. Turns out this game has been tied to a contract developer called Home Data, who nowadays publishes games under the name Magical. None of their output seems to be very noteworthy. It's a shame Konami took such a popular character and produced such a lame game. Here you have to run around ringing bells in the correct order, based on the sounds that enemies make. So not a very enjoyable game. Hopefully Konami will come up with better next time. It's another Data East game. This time it's a sequel, the second Saburo Jinguji game, the long-running adventure game series, one of which was released in the US under the name Jake Hunter not that long ago. And as you can see on the title screen, this takes place in Yokohama. The series almost seems to be heading in sort of a travelogue direction, though when you think about it, many of these Japanese murder mystery games mention a specific city in the title. The trend seems to have started with a Portopia game. Heck, the full title of that game was Portopia Renzoku Satsujin Jiken, and this is Yokohama Renzoku Satsujin Jiken. So Data East is not exactly trying to hide their influences here. First game was on the FDS system, but this one is a cartridge. You might think this is further proof that publishers were jumping ship on the FDS, but the series went back to discs after this, and then back to cartridges. You start with this introduction which shows you the characters of the game, and then gives little descriptions, in English, oddly enough. We learn that Saburo Jinguji is a notorious detective, whatever exactly that is supposed to imply. The game is full of Yokohama landmarks. You see the Marine Tower in the background on the very first screen. Among the locations you'll encounter are the Yokohama Stadium, which is the home of the baseball team the Bay Stars, as well as the Yokohama Chinatown and all that sort of thing. By now we've seen enough of these games to know how they work. You talk to some people, get some information, open up some leads, head to a new location, talk to more people. The plot here involves a girl who mysteriously disappears and later turns out to be murdered. Nothing we haven't really seen before, so we'll be moving right along. One last Japanese game from February, Replicart from Taito. So we've got a wild fire-breathing dragon of some sort, a Roger Dean-style logo, and one really annoying sound effect. So what is this, some sort of action RPG? Maybe a Zelda clone? Well, not quite. The actual game turns out to be a bit surprising. Now this right here is going to be one of the least helpful intro screens I've ever seen. This fellow is pointing at a map of Japan. Doesn't really tell you anything about the game. And then here we have what looks like a moving fish skeleton, but no, that's the dragon that you saw on the title screen. And by the way, this game has some really annoying loading screens. I've removed those for your convenience. However, once you start playing the game, you'll realize it's just a clone of an ancient computer game called Snake. Now this is really a port of an MSX2 game, released in 1987 by Sony. The name Klon is listed there, by the way. They were also responsible for the MSX Topple Zip. The MSX version has better sound and graphics, but the games seem pretty much identical. But this is really just the millionth version of the game called Snake, or sometimes Worms. The forefather of this type of game was Blockade, a 1976 arcade game from Gottfried. Atari had a version called Surround. Years later, a variation appeared on home computers such as the Trash 80 or the Commodore PET and so on. Here's one of many clones. It's called Tapeworm for the Atari 2600. The idea was that your snake moves around eating apples to make him longer. Eventually he gets so long it becomes a challenge to move around without hitting yourself. However, in Replicart, the main challenge is the controls. Most such games use simple controls like up is up, down is down, and so on. Replicart makes you use the left and right buttons, which make the snake turn left or right, but this is relative to the snake's point of view. So for example, if you're moving left and you want to head towards the bottom of the screen, you hit left on the D-pad. If you want to then head back towards the left side of the screen, you hit right. Needless to say, this control scheme is pretty hateful. It's also very difficult to time the turns correctly, so you often turn a pixel too quick or too slowly. Well, once again, Taito shows some strange judgment. Licensing a title from another publisher, which is itself a clone of a decade-old computer game that's already been released on every single system known to man, well, they must have been pretty desperate for games to release. Well, I'm glad that's now out of the way. Remember back in Chrontendo 27 when I mentioned that 1988 would see a bunch of military strategy games come out of Japan? Well, the first wave is coming up, so be prepared. Also, more US-only games from LGN and Nintendo, so we'll see you then.